Captain Michael Torres sank into seat 12F, adjusting the worn collar of his olive green jacket while his 8-year-old son David fumbled with the seatbelt beside him. The cabin buzzed with chatter, a full afternoon flight from Denver to Atlanta, overflowing with families returning home from Thanksgiving and weary business travelers tapping at laptops. Michael stared out the window, his reflection flickering against the glass. 6 months had passed since he'd made the toughest call of his life, leaving the Air Force after 15 long years. The discipline, the danger, the sky, all gone. But David needed him more than the military ever had. Since Maria's death 2 years ago, it had been just father and son against the world. "Dad, look," David whispered excitedly, pressing his nose to the window. "Those jets! Are those real fighter planes?" Michael smiled softly. "Those," he said, following his son's gaze toward the airbase across the runway, "are F-22 Raptors, the most advanced jets in the sky." David's eyes widened in awe. For a moment, the heaviness in Michael's chest lightened. Across the aisle, a woman looked up from her laptop. Late 30s, blonde hair tied back neatly, dressed in a crisp navy blazer, the type who always seemed to have somewhere important to be. She closed her laptop with a quiet snap and leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me," she said, her tone polite but curious. "I couldn't help overhearing. Are you familiar with military aircraft?" Michael gave a modest nod, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "You could say that." The woman's expression shifted. Intrigued, almost impressed, as if she sensed there was more to this quiet passenger in 12F than met the eye. "I've had some experience with them," Michael said with a small, polite smile. The woman's eyes lit up. "I thought so. I'm Sarah Coleman, journalist with Aviation Weekly." She reached across the aisle to shake his hand. "I'm actually working on a feature about modern air combat pilots. Would you mind sharing your connection to the military?" Before Michael could answer, David straightened proudly in his seat. "My dad was a pilot. He flew the really fast planes." Michael chuckled softly, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "David, remember what we said about not disturbing people?" Sarah waved it off warmly. "Oh, he's not bothering me at all," she said with a smile. "A pilot, huh? That must have been incredible. What did you fly?" "F-22s," Michael replied simply, his tone even, carrying the calm authority of someone who didn't need to impress anyone. "Mostly for the last 8 years." Sarah blinked, visibly impressed. "F-22s? You're kidding!" "Those pilots are the elite of the elite, right? There can't be more than, 180 people in the world qualified to fly them?" "Something like that," Michael said, trying to deflect the attention. His voice was humble, but Sarah could sense the depth behind his words, the stories, the danger, the loss. Just then, the intercom crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been asked by air traffic control to hold our position for a few minutes. There's some military air traffic in the area conducting training exercises," passengers murmured, craning their necks toward the windows. David pressed his face to the glass again. "Dad, look!" Outside, 2 F-22 Raptors sliced through the sky in perfect formation, no more than 1,000 feet above them. The sunlight glinted off their silver wings as they moved with effortless precision. A deadly, beautiful dance born from years of discipline, instinct, and mastery. Michael watched them silently, his jaw tightening. For the first time in months, he felt that old, familiar pull, the one that came from knowing the sky still called his name. David's breath fogged up the window as he pressed his nose against it again. "Dad, they look just like the ones you used to fly," he said, eyes wide with wonder. Before Michael could respond, an older gentleman from the row behind leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Son, did I hear right? Your father flew those aircraft?" "Yes, sir. David replied proudly, his chest puffed out. He was really good at it, too. He's got lots of medals and everything. Michael felt his face flush. David, please, he said gently, though the embarrassment in his voice was clear. We don't need to tell everyone about that. But Sarah was already studying him differently. Her curiosity sharpened, her journalistic instincts kicking in. I'm sorry if I'm being intrusive, she said, but may I ask what your call sign was? I've read that F-22 pilots often have some pretty unique ones. Michael hesitated. The name carried weight, respect, fear, and memories he'd rather not revisit. He rarely shared it outside military circles. But Sarah's tone was sincere, and David's eager eyes waited on him. Phantom, he said quietly. The reaction was instant and startling. A man several rows ahead, who'd been casually flipping through a magazine, suddenly froze. He turned, eyes wide, as if he'd just heard a ghost. Dressed in a simple button-down shirt, he looked like any other passenger. But his posture, straight and alert, told a different story. Did someone just say phantom? He called out, his voice sharp with disbelief. Sarah blinked, confused. Is that significant? The man unbuckled his seatbelt, his movements quick and deliberate. As he stepped closer down the aisle, the tension in the air shifted. Sir, he said, stopping beside their row, his expression caught between awe and urgency. Forgive me for interrupting, but did you say your call sign was Phantom? Michael met his gaze, steady but wary. That's correct, he said finally. The man exhaled slowly, almost in reverence. Around them, a few passengers turned to look, sensing that something, or someone, extraordinary was sitting quietly in seat 12F. Major Tom Bradley, F-16 pilot stationed at Shaw Air Force Base, the man said, snapping to a respectful posture as he extended his hand. His tone carried unmistakable admiration. Sir, I've heard the stories about Phantom, the red flag exercises, the missions over Syria. You're a legend in the fighter pilot community. A few passengers nearby turned their heads, sensing something unusual was happening. Michael could feel the attention closing in like a spotlight, and he shifted uneasily in his seat. But beside him, David's grin stretched ear to ear, his small chest swelling with pride. Sarah leaned in, her curiosity burning through any pretense of casual interest. I'm sorry. What's red flag? She asked. Major Bradley glanced at Michael, silently asking permission to answer. Michael gave a slight nod. Red flag, the Major explained, is the toughest, most realistic air combat training in the world, where the best pilots push themselves to the limit. And Phantom here, he gestured toward Michael with genuine awe, holds the record for the most simulated kills in a single exercise. 17 enemy aircraft, in just 5 days. No one's even come close. Gasps rippled through the nearby rows. A few passengers exchanged impressed whispers. An elderly woman across the aisle spoke up, her voice trembling with admiration. Young man, are you saying this gentleman is some sort of hero? Michael's jaw tightened, and he gave a small, modest shake of his head. I'm just someone who did his job, ma'am. No different from any other service member. With all due respect, sir, Major Bradley pressed, what you did during Operation Desert Shield was far beyond ordinary. When those Iranian fighters intercepted our recon plane, you single-handedly— Major, Michael cut in, his voice calm but firm. The quiet authority of a man used to command instantly silenced the conversation. I appreciate your kind words, but I'd prefer not to discuss operational details, especially in public. The Major stopped mid-sentence, then nodded respectfully. Around them, the hum of the cabin slowly returned, but the air still buzzed with unspoken awe. Sarah looked at Michael, her journalistic instincts torn between curiosity and respect. She could tell. There were stories behind that quiet man's eyes. Stories few people on Earth had ever heard. David tugged gently on his father's sleeve, his small voice cutting through the hush that had fallen over the cabin. "Dad, what's he talking about? What did you do?" Michael looked down at his son, meeting the bright, curious eyes that reminded him so much of Maria's. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that even good people sometimes had to do hard, haunting things to protect others? He placed a hand over David's and said softly, "Sometimes, son, pilots have to make very quick decisions, the kind that keep a lot of people safe. It's part of the job." David nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight in his father's voice. Across the aisle, Sarah leaned forward. "Mr. Torres," she began gently, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but in my research on modern aviation heroes, your name has come up more than once. The pilots I've interviewed, they speak of you with tremendous respect." Michael exhaled, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. "Heroes," he repeated quietly. "No, ma'am. I'm just a father trying to raise his son. The real heroes are the ones who didn't make it home." His words carried through the cabin like a quiet echo. The chatter died down completely. A few passengers lowered their phones, listening. Even the hum of the engine seemed softer for a moment. Major Bradley, now seated in an empty spot across the aisle, broke the silence. "Sir, if I may ask, why did you leave the service? Pilots of your caliber usually make it a lifetime commitment." Michael's gaze drifted toward David, who was still looking up at him, waiting. "My son lost his mother 2 years ago," he said gently. "He needed his father home, not deployed overseas 10 months a year. Some things," he paused, voice thick with emotion, "are more important than flying." No one spoke for several seconds. The sound of the engines filled the quiet, steady and constant like a heartbeat. Sarah closed her laptop, folding her hands on top of it. The story she'd boarded this plane to write suddenly felt irrelevant compared to the one sitting right in front of her. "That must have been an incredibly difficult decision," she said softly. Michael nodded. "The most difficult of my life," he admitted, his eyes glistening with the kind of honesty that left the entire cabin, for once, utterly still. "Flying wasn't just what I did," Michael said quietly, his gaze distant. "It was who I was. Every mission, every takeoff, it was my life." "But David," he looked down at his son, voice softening, "he's my priority now. He's already lost one parent. I wasn't going to risk him losing another." David's small hand slipped into his father's. "I'm glad you came home, Dad," he said earnestly. "I missed you when you were gone." Michael squeezed his hand gently, swallowing the lump that rose in his throat. The same ache that always came when David mentioned those lonely nights. "I missed you too, buddy," he murmured. Just then, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for takeoff. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." The engines hummed to life, a low, familiar vibration under their feet. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Major Bradley stood up, offering one last handshake. "Sir, it's been an honor meeting you. If you ever decide to get back in the cockpit, even as an instructor, I know a dozen pilots who'd line up to learn from you." Michael smiled faintly. "Thank you, Major, but my flying days," he glanced at David, "are behind me now." As Bradley returned to his seat, Sarah leaned across the aisle once more, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Torres, I know you value your privacy, but would you ever consider sharing your story? Not the classified parts, just your perspective on service, sacrifice, what it really means to be a hero. I think people need to hear voices like yours." Michael considered her words as the aircraft lifted off, the earth shrinking beneath them. Through the window he caught sight of the 2 F-22s still circling in perfect formation, glinting like silver ghosts in the afternoon light. "Maybe someday," he said at last. "But right now, My most important mission is sitting right here beside me." David looked up, smiling proudly. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." Michael felt his heart swell. Part pride, part fear, part overwhelming love. He turned to his son and said softly, "Then be kind, be honest, and always put family first. The rest I will take care of itself." As the plane climbed through the clouds, Captain Michael Torres, the man once known as Phantom, held his son's hand and watched the endless blue stretch before them. And in that quiet moment between earth and sky, he understood something he never had before, that the greatest acts of heroism don't always happen in combat, but in the simple, steadfast choice to put love over glory.